Welcome back to The Move, where we're vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that time in the Bible where Noah and his family are about to go on a road trip, and God is like, yo, Noah, make sure you pack some snacks for the trip. If you're wondering what in the world am I talking about, we're talking about Genesis chapter 6, verses 9 through 22. My guest for today's episode is none other than the bald eagle, Tyler Morrison himself. Question, when you're about to go on a road trip, what is the go-to snack that you must have?
Ooh, man, great question. I wish I would have seen this coming. I feel like I'm definitely like
Sweet,
I'm the kind of
salty?
person that it's whatever I'm feeling. I'm usually gonna go for both, but if
Okay.
I'm gonna combine it, my go-to, and this is only if I'm not with my wife. I can't do this when I'm with my wife, is a Snickers.
Is it because she wants to eat some of the Snickers or she hates Snickers?
Can you imagine? I'm like, can't do it when Morgan's around because otherwise she'll want some. No, she's
Well,
allergic to peanuts.
oh shoot. Okay. Definitely
Like,
don't want to
she'll
do
die.
that. But
Yeah.
but I would have said, hey, you not wanting to share is a legitimate option. When I get boba, which probably would be my go-to snack if I'm like on a long road trip, I want some good boba. Ube is the only flavor, or taro is the only flavor that Emily doesn't
Ooh.
like. So when I'm not feeling so like, gracious, I'm like, I'm going to get me some taro boba today. And whenever she sees me drinking it, she's like, kind of looks at me and like, she knows what I did. And it was
She knows
intentional.
what's up.
And I don't apologize 1 second for it, Emily. But in today's episode, yeah. Okay. So Noah is told to build a boat. And to put a bunch of things on the boat. There's a bunch of animals. I think it was really important, and the instructions were specific enough that the 2 animals that were to get on the boat, God said specifically, one's supposed to be male and the other one's supposed to be female. That's probably really good advice. Otherwise, things are going to be a little tricky down the line.
Brilliant.
And brilliant. God, you're just a mastermind. At the end of the episode, or at the end of the chapter, rather, God's like, yo, and make sure you bring enough food. Get some of the food that's, that you're going to need, because it might be a while where you're on the boat. And I think it's interesting because I don't think here that Noah is really under like the awareness of what's about to take place. Like you and I know the story. It's, you probably
Right.
sang the same song in Sabbath school class or whatever the case is, because I remember hearing Emily singing this to Mateo earlier, and I'm wondering, did everyone grow up? The raindrops fall with the. Do you know?
Oh no, I don't know that one. I was thinking
You
the
don't know
rain comes down and the floods came up. The
That's
rain
another one, but
comes.
that's the wise man builds his house upon the rock. That's not Noah.
Dang, you're right. I don't even know my kids' song.
So the Noah song is the raindrops fall with a pitter patter pit, the pitter patter pit, the pitter patter pit, and then like
Oh,
yeah,
you keep
that's.
going, boy. You keep singing. I don't know though.
No. We have a Bible study to cover. This is not the time for songs and dancing,
Okay,
Tyler.
true.
Um.
But yeah,
So
we've got this very like vivid like context that immediately when we're reading it, we're like, oh, this story I've heard my whole life.
40 days, 40
Versus,
nights, got it. No worries. But Noah's like, I don't even know what rain is. I don't know what a boat is. And so God's giving him all these detailed instructions. This is what I want you to build it. This is how tall it's going to be, how wide it's going to be. And Noah is the person. He's the guy. He's the go-to person for God. And I think it's really interesting, and I'm curious as to what we make of this. Is the way that God describes people is so interesting, right? Like all throughout Scripture, God describes people in ways that often maybe don't feel fitting. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, Tyler. I'm sure you have, because I know your testimony, I know your life story, at least bits and pieces of it. But like I think about Joshua, right, who's in many books later in this book, but the angel appears to Joshua and he calls him great man of valor, right? And it seems as though the story is like he's kind of like hiding out because he's like afraid of war. He's afraid, and yet he's called the man of valor. And now Noah is being introduced here, and Noah is a righteous man, blameless in his generations. I just think that's so cool, and like, wow, like if God could call you anything, like why not that? That sounds beautiful.
And man, so 2 things that you just brought up. I think the first one, they segue so nicely together. This thing about like Noah when he's hearing this, and I think this is such an important point to remember when we read the Bible, is that when we're reading about these people, whatever's happening to them, to put ourselves in their shoes is to
Mm.
imagine hearing it for the first time.
Yeah,
Like to
absolutely.
imagine getting this instruction or having this encounter, and it's not like this mundane story they grew up with. It's like this really happened to them, and what would that have been like? And so for
Mm.
Noah to be hearing about this information and to be receiving this message, right?
Hmm.
And then for God to call him righteous, like for the Bible to first position and frame and introduce Noah as a
Hmm.
righteous man,
Hmm.
one of the first things that I thought of is, I think it's one of my favorite definitions of what a righteous man is Romans 4 when it talks about Abraham and it says that he was righteous because he believed God was able to do anything he said.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
That's good.
so, if that's the way that this is framing Noah, then in Genesis 6, we have this introduction of this man in a world where all of a sudden, for the first time, everything that God said was so good. He had
Mm.
just made it so good. Now, in verse 11, the whole thing is corrupt. But in the
Whoops.
middle of all of it, it's like, all of those refrigerated snacks that were so tasty when you put them in, but now 3 days later have all
Oh
spoiled and it's
no.
just a big
Yeah.
bummer. You never got to them. It's like all the things that God made that were so good have now spoiled. Like something has corrupted them. It's tragic, but in the midst of that, there's a man who is righteous, who walks with God, who believes him so that he can come and tell him this very outlandish thing to do. And Noah's like, okay, I'll do it.
I'm probably, I am not even probably, I am getting ahead of ourselves in the narrative because we'll learn more about Noah and his family in the chapters to come. But, when the Bible calls Noah righteous and blameless in his generation, we know that it can't mean that he doesn't make mistakes because of the narrative of his life. And the contrast, or maybe the potential contrast that's at play here, where you're saying, oh, the whole world's evil, the whole world's falling into corruption, but Noah's this fantastic guy who's never done a wrong in his life. He helps old ladies cross the street and never cheats on his taxes and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, maybe not. The narrative
Mm-hmm.
will show in chapters to come that this, if what we're thinking is that Noah is like Mother Teresa, no, that's actually not it. And so it's very important for us when we see this idea of Noah being a righteous and blameless individual. It's I love that you brought it to Abraham, that Abraham is someone who believes, and we'll get into Abraham in just in several other chapters. But this is one of
Right,
these
right, right.
themes that we're going to see time and time and time again in the book of Genesis, and you can see it in any other book in the Bible that you read, where it talks about people who have very real hangups, very real shortcomings and mistakes, and let's just call it for what it is,
Definitely.
sins in their life, and yet God calls them something that it requires faith to believe in. You are a
Mm-hmm.
man of valor. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm scared witless right now. You are a righteous and blameless man. Like, what are you talking about, God? Like, what have you seen my track records? And it really comes down to faith is believing God's word over your life story. And
Yeah.
and it's beautiful because this is actually it is what we see in the book of Hebrews when it actually starts to describe Noah, that Noah becomes an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So we know
Mm-hmm.
for a fact that the reason why Noah is considered righteous and he's considered blameless isn't because he's Mother Teresa and never did anything wrong, but it actually is because he believed. God said something and he believed. And that belief led to action. And I think that's just so cool.
Yeah, isn't that? I mean, anybody that's going to be journeying through the book with us is going to notice I do a lot of hyperlinking to the New
Yeah.
Testament a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, and
Mm-hmm.
a big part of that's because I don't know if you remember math books in like I don't know sixth, seventh, eighth grade. In the back of the book, it was like all of the answers to the odds,
Yes.
right? It
So,
wasn't every
oddly
answer.
enough, I only ever got 50% on my homework.
Yeah, and so I mean, you could go and you could get half the answers, but it would be really
Yeah.
helpful if the teacher assigned the evens. At least you could solve a couple, figure it out, and go back. And
Right.
that's what I feel like the New Testament is. It's like
Mm.
it's like filling in the blanks. Like you get half the answers, and then you can go back and read the Old Testament, and things just start to just come alive. And
Mm.
so, like what you're saying about this, I think if you're gonna take something from this section of scripture, Noah being called a righteous man, like that James it says that faith is shown with works. He
Mm-hmm.
says like I'll show you my faith by my works, right? What does that mean? Well, if you really believe God, if you believe what he says, then what do you do next? You know what I'm saying? Like if God
Mm-hmm.
tells you, "Hey, build an ark
I
because
believe
you're going to need a
because
boat."
Yeah, because water's coming. What and rain is gonna come. What is rain? He's like,
What's
don't worry about
rain?
it.
Yeah.
Build a boat. What's a boat? Okay. I realize that what I'm working with here isn't quite what I had hoped for. Let me draw out the blueprints for you. This many cubits and that many cubits, and it's gonna be this tall. He's like, okay. You clearly don't know what's going on, but Noah believed. He said, okay, God's able to do what He said He's gonna do.
And so then, because he believes, he builds a boat.
If you were Noah in this, if you try to put yourself back in that time frame, what do you think? Like, why do you think someone would say no? Like, we don't know if Noah was the first person God said to build a boat. He might have been, but like, let's
It's true,
imagine
yeah.
that Noah was a skeptical person, or maybe that God spoke to someone else. What do you think is the narrative in your head that causes you to be like, am I just hearing things, or maybe I am hearing things and this is just weird. I'm not going to go with it.
Man, what a great question, Justin. That is such a good question. I I think there's a couple things. Logic, right? I've never
Sure.
seen anything like this happen
Our,
before.
our, our
As
scientists have never discovered rain yet, therefore it can't rain.
we've never observed it. Yeah, this is silly. Or pride. I mean, ultimately, like,
Hmm.
and not so much like yeah, I mean, arrogance. It's this idea of like, I know better,
Hmm.
and I think we see a lot of reasons why people do step outside of faith
Hmm.
over and over, right, throughout scripture. And it's, I might know better. It's impatience. It's temptation, being lured away by something that is pleasing to the eye, right? Like Eve in the garden.
Sure.
So any one of those, fear, insecurity. I think exactly like what you said when you gave the example of like, me righteous, have you seen my life? When
Right.
you look at yourself, you're going to find a whole lot of reasons to disqualify you from the things that God
Hmm.
calls you to do.
Hmm.
And I think that, so it's almost like both sides of the coin, an insecurity from your own shortcomings, or maybe a pride of like, no, that's not the best way to do it. Like, I know a better way.
So then maybe now the flip side of that question, why you wouldn't do it. But I also know that in the last however many of years, there have been moments where God has called you to do something that requires faith.
Mm-hmm.
What's the conversation like in your head when you're in the middle of that valley of decision and you're like, okay, I really get this sense that God is leading me somewhere, and here's all the reasons why I shouldn't do it, like the reasons that you just said, whether it's pride or arrogance or quote unquote logic, and yet you still have this kind of sureness that God's leading you somewhere. What's the conversation like that helps you get to the point of faith and action?
Man, are you asking me personally?
Yeah, like you,
Like
Tyler. I
over the
know that
last
you.
couple of years?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
not the hypothetical?
No.
Well,
Tell me a story that of something that God has called you to that has required faith, and why did you make the decision to move in that direction?
why did I make the decision to move? Literally move to a new place to live. I was
There you go.
working as a technical recruiter, right? I think we talked about that at one point,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
recruiting IT professionals. And when the love of God transformed my life, I just wanted so badly to do ministry full time. I just like, it's all I wanted. And I remember I was praying one day, and when I pray, I have a iPad. I think you and I both do this, Justin. We use an app and we journal, like we prayer journal, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was prayer journaling, and I remember I just was like, God, I just felt like this is this is something that I desire, that I know you've placed in my heart. And as I was just writing about that, it was like this clear thought kind of came to my mind, like, yes, I want you to do that.
Hmm.
And then I said, when? I was, because as soon as you're
Because you want to go right
like,
away.
oh, exactly, right? Like if you get for Christmas, you get like tickets to go do something that you've always wanted to do. The first thing you want to know is like, when is it?
Yeah.
Like I want to do it now, right?
Hmm.
And I was just like, when? I'm ready. And the only thing that kept coming back to my mind was like, relax.
Oh,
It it'll be all right. Like it'll happen when
so
it happens.
so the call wasn't actually to move. The call was to just chill out and trust and to be patient. Is that what you're
Be
saying?
patient. It was like, yeah, and the exact words that kept running through my mind, and this was over months when if I would ever pray about it,
Oh
was you'll
man.
know when you know, and you're gonna love it.
Oh, that's frustrating.
You'll
I,
know
I
when
mean,
you
I
know.
mean, I don't know if it was frustrating
It
for you,
can
but I
be.
can imagine how it could be frustrating.
Yeah, it can be. I think like it all, how frustrating it is depends on the level of um, contentment you're living
Hmm.
from. How much
Hmm.
do you believe that God is enough where you're at? And so, that
Interesting.
was the thing for me where it was like, okay, you must want this for me now. And he was like, no, if you're wanting to do ministry full time, then you need to learn to minister in the place that you're at now. How else can you help other people to know how to do
Because
that?
because
And so
because
it was like,
there's almost this sense that like if you were to get it right away, then the thing that's making you happy is that thing.
yeah,
If you can't learn to be content where you are at that moment, then it says something about the way that you're relating to this other thing.
man, the blessing of peace and contentment,
Hmm.
like to be content when God calls you, is to then wait on the Lord. What's the Bible say? Wait on the Lord,
Hmm.
and He will renew your strength.
This is interesting because Noah had to come to a point in which he wasn't measuring himself by the opinions of others, right? We're talking about like what would cause you to not do it if you were in Noah's position. Ridicule, obviously, like the
Oh
loss
man,
of your
yeah.
reputation. And so what Noah had to do is get to a point in which he's okay being the crazy guy, being the weirdo, being the person who's just like going
Right.
off and doing wild things. He's okay doing that because he's made his peace in another way. There's one way to achieve certain levels of dopamine, right? Is through other people, through other relationships and things like that. But what Noah is realizing that there's a different source, and he's going to connect
Hmm.
himself to that source instead.
Man, I never realized how much I could relate with Noah. What a blessing, man. I've really been blessed by the way you've been describing Noah, right? Like that is literally my life, Justin.
Mm,
Where
mm,
if there was ever anything that would have caused me to walk away or to shrink in fear from boldly proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ, it would be people calling me crazy. And
mm.
when the faithfulness of God awakened faithfulness in me, his faithfulness in me,
Mm.
uh now I can confidently say like he will be my faith
Mm.
in those days of ridicule. Just like Noah, I can boldly proclaim that he has made me righteous because I believe him. And if I
There you
believe
go.
him, no matter what comes, stormy weather, no matter what rains may fall, I'm gonna be all right because he's in me and he'll hold me with his strong right hand. Man, what a beautiful story.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You know what's also beautiful?
Tell me.
You're beautiful, my friend. You are. It's true. It's true. You're a beautiful man. It's true.
Yo, I meant to tell you yesterday when we were recording, your hair is looking so nice. And am I jealous? I won't say. Am I jealous? I don't know.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it.
To
Hey,
all the
man, listen.
listeners, I am bald and Justin has beautiful, black, luscious locks.
Yeah. By the way, if
So,
you're listening to this on podcast, first off, thank you. We love it. It's awesome. We're honored that you would spend time with us. But also, there's a video version on YouTube in case you like videos and you want to see beautiful Tyler Morrison in the flesh. You can go check that out over on the YouTube channel. Hey, listen, that's all the time that we got for today. Tyler, thank you again so much for the perspective, for the stories that you bring, and for being a part of this movement. I really appreciate it.
love it. Love it. Thanks, Justin.
Hey, something I want to tell you guys about is it's not a ministry. It's a nonprofit. It's called Fight the New Drug. If you haven't heard of them yet, it's a fantastic organization that I think you'll enjoy. What is the new drug and why should we fight it? The new drug is pornography. Pornography affects massive amounts of people. I don't know what the exact statistics are, but it's well over 50% of people have at one point in their their life story admitted to the addiction to pornography. This is something that is not only for non-Christians. In fact, it's not only for just lay people, but I remember reading a study that something like 75% of male pastors have had, at least at one point in their life, struggled with a pornography addiction. So all this to say, not that it's all doom and gloom, far be it, but maybe to give hope to any of the listeners right now who might feel like, oh shoot, that's my story. Couple things I want you to know. First off, if that's your story, there's no shame in it. That's a story that a lot of us have shared. It's a story that both myself and Tyler have shared, and we want you to know that yes, the struggle can be real. That's a phrase that people say, right? The struggle is real, but we also want you to know that the victory is real. That when Jesus talks about whom the Son sets free, that they're free indeed. That's a reality, that you can take that to the bank. So why fight the new drug? Well, they're not a Christian organization. They don't necessarily talk about the pornography addiction from a religious perspective, but they do talk about it from a scientific perspective. There's studies that are done. There's interviews done with all kinds of people. And it's a good companion, in my opinion, to faith in the accomplished victory that Jesus has given to us. It's still a really cool movement to be a part of. So you can check them out over at fightthenewdrug.com. They have a documentary. They have merch that is actually quite awesome. So oddly enough, I'm not actually wearing one of the shirts right now. I think I've worn their shirts multiple times in the podcast without actually giving the call out. Fight the New Drug. It's a movement. It's an incredible thing. It's one of those organizations that I'm glad is out there in the world. And if you or anyone that you know has been affected by it, this is a great resource to kind of assist you in your walk. And so I just want to let you know about it. If you haven't heard about it yet, it's a fantastic place. Great resources, and I think that you'll be blessed by it. That's Fight the New Drug.